Hello, good people of YouTube. Mountbatten here, and today I'm bringing you guys my top 5 biggest letdowns when it comes to premium ships. These are 5 premium ships that, going up to their release, they had a fair amount of hype. In the case of a couple of them, a very large amount of hype. But then, when they did get released in full, they were, well, they didn't live up to the expectations, to put it mildly, in most cases. So, those are the 5 we're going to be going over today. This is all 125% in my opinion. Also, as you're going through the video, if you do like it, make sure to drop a like and leave a comment. That helps out with the algorithm and getting the video pushed out to more and more viewers, so I do appreciate those of you that do that. So again, it's all my opinion, so let's go ahead and get into it. Starting with number 5, which is the Soviet supercruiser, the Sevastopol. Now, the Sevastopol, I'm putting it back here at 5 because when she does work well, but good God, did this ship just get stuck in development hell forever, which kind of helped fuel the hype around her. But then when she got released, we got a ship that was just so gimmicked that it's almost pointless with her gimmicks. Oh, man. So, the Sevastopol, for those of you guys that don't know, she was announced, I think she was one of the longer premiums we've had stuck in dev hell. I believe it was almost like a year and a half from her announcement to her release. And originally she had a very odd set of consumables, and I'm saying that with the set of consumables that she has today in mind. She was supposed to have a, like, hail that had 8 charges, but it was a very small hail, but it cooled down very fast, kind of like the fast damage cons of the Soviet battleships that she does still have. So you could have very small hails that would be, coming off cooldown. I think they were like 30 seconds or something like that. But then they changed the heal to slowly and surely into the more and more of a super heal. But the super heal she winds up with today is, God, it takes forever for it to do anything. In fact, if you look at the icon on the toolbar there at the bottom, instead of having the normal green crosses that indicate it's a heal, there's a stopwatch next to it because it takes that long for this heal to do its thing. This heal takes 1 minute and 30 seconds to work, and it takes just about 3 minutes for it to come off a cooldown. So that means that, yes, it's a super heal, but it's not like the Conqueror's super heal, like the British ship's super heals, where, you can get a large amount of your health back in, a pretty quick time, which means that if you're going up against a lot of fire, you can just pop that heal and kind of brute force your way through that fire. That doesn't happen here with the Sevastopol because, again, it takes 1 minute and 30 seconds to do it. It also has a speed boost that is just a little bit too short to do anything. And then again, it's got the fast cooldown damage cons of the Soviet battleships, and even the hull is gimmicky. The hull of the Sevastopol is the hull of the Kronstadt. Now, the Kronstadt is the Tier 9 Soviet supercruiser or large cruiser, and the Kronstadt was one of the first of these large/supercruisers, whatever you want to call them nowadays. And for the time, the Kronstadt hull was pretty good because it's got Tier 9 battleship levels of HP on a Tier 9 cruiser slot. The armor was decent. But as time went on, we got better and better hulls for these Tier 9 large cruisers. And by today's standards, the Kronstadt hull is actually quite bad. And the Sevastopol's hull, well, they took away the gimmick that made it viable. See, the Kronstadt has around 75,000 HP. They cut 10,000 HP of that off for the Sevastopol. So now you have arguably the worst large cruiser hull at Tier 10 with 10,000 less HP. Now, the saving grace is that she does have 15-inch guns. They are Soviet 15-inch guns. This is one of the designs for the Kronstadt cruiser in real life. The Germans and the Soviets were, well, the Soviets are building it. The Germans were going to sell them the turrets for it with the 15-inch guns, but obviously Barbarossa happened, and, well, friendship ended there. So the design changed back to the Kronstadt, that is the Tier 9 premium Soviet cruiser. So this was a pretty cool historical ship that many were looking forward to, and then what we got was just a super gimmicked mess that is really only good at hiding, and even in some cases not that good because the turrets take forever to turn, and the ship is pretty maneuverable. but again, the turrets can't stay on target to save their lives, even with the appropriate modules and commander skills equipped. So, bit of a letdown there. Moving on to number 4, we have another Soviet ship, the Tier 6 Soviet battleship, the Novorossiysk. Ah, yes, the return of the Julius Caesar. Man, so Julius Caesar, if you guys don't know, it's a Tier 5 Italian premium battleship. And if you watch the battleship tier list video that I put out last Thursday, she is a ship that doesn't really have much of a downsides when most Tier 5 battleships have at least 1 or 2 terrible characteristics about them. They're either slow, immaneuverable, inaccurate guns, or the guns are too small to do anything. The Julius Caesar just has decent everything at Tier 5, which for a Tier 5 battleship means that it's amazing. Now, originally, Wargaming wanted to actually move the Julius Caesar from Tier 5 to Tier 6 because they felt it would be more appropriately balanced for that tier, and they wouldn't even have to make that many changes to the ship to get it to work at Tier 6. But obviously, those that had already purchased Julius Caesar didn't want that to happen because they had bought a Tier 5 ship and they had spent real-world money on it, and their arguments went over Wargaming and they left it as is. Wargaming came around a few years later and reintroduced the Julius Caesar as the Novorossiysk, which this is what happened to the Julius Caesar after World War II. As part of war reparations from Italy, they had to turn over the Julius Caesar to the Soviets, where it promptly just rotted and poured and eventually sank under mysterious circumstances. It's a pretty cool story if you want to dig into that. I'm sure Dragonfell has a video on that. But anyway, so, you know, again, another cool historical ship that is also the reintroduction of a very highly desired premium ship. But rather than just taking the Julius Caesar and moving it to Tier 6, they touched it. They touched it a lot. They changed a couple of things here and there, and TLDR, it's just a more mediocre Julius Caesar at a more miserable matchmaking slot. So you have a Tier 6 battleship that, again, is a Julius Caesar that's been switched up in a couple of ways, that now has to deal with Tier 8 games, and that includes things like Tier 8 CVs, Tier 8 submarines, things that the Caesar doesn't have to deal with. There's a very big power gap when you start to get into the double up tier range, and, you know, Tier 5 to Tier 7 is one thing, but Tier 6 to Tier 8, there's a big power gap between Tier 7 ships and Tier 8 ships. So yeah, it's just a more miserable Caesar, and when it came out, you know, again, everyone wanted to get it because it's a Caesar being reintroduced into the game, and then it's just bleh. Again, it has its moments, that's why it's the number 4 slot. It's not entirely terrible in my opinion, but it was a big letdown. You know, again, we're getting this awesome ship back into the game to where we can pick it up if we weren't able to pick up the original, and it's bleh. So that's why she's at number 4 in my opinion. Moving on down to number 3, we have the French battleship Strasbourg. Now, the Strasbourg has her sister in game already with the Dunkirk, the Tier 6 French battleship. Now, the Dunkirk is a ship that doesn't have too many fans, however, I am one of them. So this one for me was a personal letdown, because I like the Dunkirk. I'm part of a very small minority that do. And the Dunkirk, for all its flaws, is at the end of the day a pretty fun and maneuverable Tier 6 battleship. It's a tier where most battleships, except for like the battlecruiser lines, are still very slow, very immaneuverable, but the Dunkirk is nice and nippy. The guns hit hard, but admittedly they do have terrible dispersion. And when they announced the Strasbourg, I thought, oh cool, they're basically going to Jean Bar the Dunkirk. If you guys don't know what I mean, the Jean Bar is the Tier 9 premium version of the Richelieu. The devs took the Richelieu, basically supercharged it, and put it at Tier 9. The guns were more accurate, they gave it a reload booster, its AA got reinforced, but it was slower, and it still has Tier 8 battleship health at Tier 9. It's a quick rundown on the differences between the two of them, and it has a slightly faster base reload as well. And when they announced the Strasbourg, again, I thought that's what they were going to do with the Strasbourg. They did, but they didn't fully commit to it. She has a slightly faster reload, slightly better dispersion. They gave her a reload booster, but they didn't give her anything like an engine boost, and they didn't really step up the armor that much. The side armor is slightly thicker than the Dunkirk, but again, it's a minimal difference between the two ships. And like I was saying with the Novorossiysk, there's a big power gap between the Tier 7 ships and the Tier 8 ships. Now that the Strasbourg's at tier 7, you have to deal with not only tier 8 ships all the time, but also tier 9 ships. And there's a big gap between tier 7 and tier 9. Now, if they had done something like decreased her detection range a bit more and given her an engine boost, I think this ship would have worked out pretty well, because you'd be a fast, fairly stealthy battleship at tier 7 that has to deal with tier 9 ships most of the time because of how matchmaking is now. But they didn't. And what we wound up getting is just a Dunkirk that doesn't get quite the shotgunny salvos that it normally does, but now you have to fight Musashis and Georgias and Kearsarges and all that fun stuff that can just clap half of your health away in 1 or 2 shells. So, a big personal letdown here for me, and I'm sure most of you that were enjoyers of the Dunkirk probably weren't too happy with this one either. And then going on down to number 2, we have the one, the only, Tiger 59. Do you want to pay $50 to own a third of a Minotaur? Well, buddy, do I have the deal of a lifetime for you here with Tiger 59. So, Tiger 59 is, again, another real still historical ship. Again, most of these ships that people hype up, they were real still historical ships. People like when we get these real ships in game. It's very cool. I think it's one of the coolest things about this game when there's a real life ship that you get to read about or see in the news or something like that, or on the History Channel, and then you get to play it in game. And since the player base is on the older side, there's a fair amount of people that, again, probably saw the ship in real life. It's like with the Iowa Sisters. It's so cool to go to one of the Iowa museums, then come back to your PC and get to play as the Iowa. It's a very cool experience. Anyway, so Tiger 59. This ship, and the most frustrating thing about this ship, before I get too far into it, is that it's so close to being a good ship. It is so close. But they just didn't commit. The Tiger 59 is, again, a third of a Minotaur. It's a light cruiser that in real life has 2 Minotaur turrets on it. And, on paper, a tier 8 cruiser that has 2 of Minotaur's turrets on it doesn't sound too bad. However, they didn't give it enough of a bump to its load time. So the reload time of the main battery guns is around 3 seconds, which does sound on the fast side, but then you have to think it has 4 guns. That's it. This thing has 4 guns, 4 Minotaur guns, so they're small caliber guns. And what makes Minotaur so formidable is that it has the ability to, of course, just vomit shells downrange at an incredible rate. And if you ever play Minotaur, if you ever played against Minotaur and you have ears, you'll notice that a good chunk of the shells either shatter or bounce on your ship. That's all you're going to hear for the next, 40, 50 seconds while you're trying to run out of the Minotaur's range. So apply that to a ship that only has 4 guns. And she doesn't have HE, by the way. If they'd given the ship HE, I think that would solve a lot of the issues, but they didn't. And then put it at tier 8, where it has to see tier 10 ships. Yeah. Now, in terms of utility, she's pretty good. You get smoke and radar, and admittedly, her concealment with a full build is pretty much her radar range, so when you are not firing and you get spotted, you can hit the radar button and see what is spotting you, essentially, with the Tiger 59. But that's about where the good ends with her. Of course, like all the other British light cruisers, she explodes when you look at her too hard. She doesn't get torpedoes for some reason, which is something that I found very odd, because now that you only have 4 guns, unlike the other light cruisers that can hide in their smoke and farm, when the battleships decide to push you, you can't, at least have torpedoes to fall back on to throw in their general direction to dissuade them from pushing you. You just die, basically. So, yeah. And even with the 4 guns, this leaves the ship in a very awkward situation to where it takes her quite a minute to deal with DDs. And don't get me wrong, like she can murder DDs. She can. It just takes a little while longer than other British light cruisers because, again, of your 4 guns. So you're in this awkward situation where you are fighting a DD. And unlike in the Minotaur and the Neptune, they actually take a pretty good chunk of your health off with their guns if they decide to use their guns. And it's just really awkward. Now, you do have a super heal, so that does kind of help with that. But it's just a really awkward ship to play, one that's not fun to play, and that you have to put in a lot of work to do very good in the Tiger 59. In like a division or something, and you're playing together with like your buddies on comms, sure, she might work. But Yeah, just a ship that got released to a solid ugh from most of the community. And going on down to our numero uno, we have the Tier 8 German aircraft carrier, the Graf Zeppelin. This is the only premium in recent memory, at least, that she was such a shock to the community when she was released that she had to be pulled. They haven't done that with another ship since then, in my mind, at least from what I can remember. Someone will correct me in the comments down below. That's how YouTube works if I'm wrong, but I believe this is the only one, at least in the past 4 or 5 years, that this has happened to. So, Graf Zeppelin. Now, there is a bit of this that isn't really the ship's fault. It's Wargaming's fault. The story behind the Graf Zeppelin, if you haven't heard it, which if you've been a viewer for my channel for some time, I talk about the ship a lot because I actually do like her, but I'd be lying if I told y'all she wasn't a big letdown when she was released. So, what happened to Graf Zeppelin is that way back in the day, before some recent changes, I say recent, these happened like 2 years ago, but before some changes to the CC program, CCs could show ships that were still in development. They just had to be very clear about that in their video or in whatever content they were making, but they could show off ships that were in testing. Was one of the big highlights about the CC program, and the Graf Zeppelin was one of those ships. The Graf Zeppelin was just an absolute god-tier carrier during her testing phase. She had amazing striking capabilities. She could completely just vibe check cruisers and even battleships off of the map, and this is far enough back that we are talking about RTS CVs here, so not the current iteration of CVs. Now, Wargaming decided, quite literally, I think it was 4 or 5 days before her release date, they completely changed the ship around. Now, a large part of the community, of course, after seeing all the CC videos and articles and stuff, are thinking that they're getting one version of the Graf Zeppelin, and not the one that's, quickly been swapped out a few days before her release. So, when she gets released, you have this version of the Graf Zeppelin that was completely mediocre, and in comparison to her other version, terrible. So, understandably, there's quite a few players that are quite upset about this, and it causes enough of a storm that Wargaming has to completely pull the ship from the store, and she doesn't get reintroduced until the CV rework. Wargaming said that when they pulled her, they were going to let those who had purchased the ship keep it in port. They were going to create a special, I think it was like a Discord channel or something like that, to where they could talk with the Graf Zeppelin owners and talk about what they didn't like about the ship and how they'd like to change it up. And, well, CV rework happened, so the ship, along with all other carriers, got completely reworked during that, and we have the Graf Zeppelin that we have today, which is admittedly a terrible carrier, but like I said, I do like her. She's one of my most played carriers, and one of the few carriers that I actually have decent stats in. Why? I do goofy things like put a secondary build on it and use it more as a cruiser with 3 flavors of spotting aircraft rather than a carrier in most cases, because the secondaries on the ship are actually really good. They're actually some of the best secondaries in the game. They will murder any DD that gets close to it, even after the Commander rework, where you can't really build into secondaries anymore in the Graf Zeppelin. Before the Commander rework, they were, well, quite terrifying, to be honest, but they're still pretty darn good today. You can murder most half-health cruisers and definitely most full-health DDs that get a little bit too close to you. There's a clip on my channel somewhere where I take out a battleship, 2 cruisers, and I think two DDs in one match for the secondaries on this thing. It's a ridiculous ship. But yes, definitely so bad of a letdown that they literally had to pull the ship after her release. Alright guys, that's my top 5 letdowns. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments down below. What ships should be on this list, what ships shouldn't be on this list, in your opinion. And tell me you guys' top 5 letdown ships in the comments down below. They could be Techline, Premium, whatever. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to drop a like and leave a comment down below. Subscribe to the channel. We're going to 50,000 subs. Thanks to you guys, and that is awesome. Hope you guys have a wonderful Monday. Have a wonderful rest of your week. I hope to catch you guys in the next one.